The wind howled across the Kansas prairie like a wounded animal that night, tearing through the dying cornstalks and rattling the windows of Eli Turner's lonely farmhouse. The lamp flickered weakly on his kitchen table, casting the old man's shadow, long and tired, against the wall. He had lived alone since his wife passed, and the silence had grown so thick around him that even the creak of a floorboard sometimes made him jump. But tonight, it wasn't silence that found him. It was something far worse. It began with a sound, a faint cry, soft and distant, carried by the wind. Eli froze mid-step. At first, he thought it was the wind moaning through the old oak behind the barn. But then he heard it again, clearer this time. A human voice. A woman's. He grabbed his lantern and stepped out into the cold. The fields stretched endless and black under the moonlight, the air biting at his face. He followed the sound, boots crunching on the frosted earth. Then he saw it, blood. Drops dark and fresh, trailing through the corn rows. His heart began to hammer as he followed the trail, every sense sharpened, every instinct on edge, and there she was, a woman, lying half-buried among the broken stalks, her dress torn, her hair tangled with dirt and blood. One of her hands clutched her side, where crimson soaked through the fabric. Her face, pale as moonlight, turned slowly toward him, eyes filled with a desperate kind of knowing. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Please." "And my pain." Eli stumbled back a step, shocked. She looked like a ghost, something torn between this world and the next. He knelt beside her, setting the lantern down. The yellow light revealed the gunshot wound just below her ribs. Whoever had done it hadn't meant for her to live long. He swallowed hard. "Ma'am, you're hurt bad." "But I can get you help." Her eyes fluttered open wider, shimmering with tears. "No help. Please, just do it." She looked right at the revolver holstered on his hip. For a moment, Eli couldn't breathe. He'd seen men die before. Outlaws, soldiers, even neighbors caught in dust storms. But this was different. This was someone begging him to take what little life she had left. His hand went to the revolver slowly. He pulled it out and stared at it, the steel glinting in the lantern light. His thumb brushed the hammer. He could end her suffering. He could make it quick. But something stopped him. He looked at her face, young, no more than 20. Beneath the blood and dirt, he saw someone who'd once smiled, who'd once laughed. A daughter, maybe. A sweetheart. He let out a rough breath. "Ain't no man got the right to play God." And before she could protest, he lifted her gently into his arms. She gasped in pain, a sharp, fragile sound, but didn't resist. Her head fell weakly against his chest. "You're gonna live," Eli muttered, half to her, half to himself. "You hear me? You're gonna live." He carried her back across the frozen field, every step heavier than the last. The wind lashed at his face, and once he thought she'd stop breathing altogether. But when he reached his porch, he felt the faintest pulse against his chest. Inside, he laid her on the bed, lit every lamp he owned, and got to work. He hadn't patched a wound since the war, but the memory came back to him fast. Boil the water, tear clean cloth, and pray your hands don't shake. All night, he worked to stop the bleeding, his breath fogging in the cold air. When at last she stirred and whispered a name, Clara, Eli sat back and thanked every angel he could remember by name. Days passed. She drifted between fever dreams and silence, muttering words he couldn't piece together. Sometimes she cried out for someone named Pa. Other times she cursed under her breath as if she were fighting ghosts he couldn't see. Eli never asked questions. He just changed her bandages, brought her broth, and kept her alive. It wasn't until the 5th night that she woke with clarity in her eyes. "Why didn't you do it?" she asked softly. Eli was whittling by the fire, and the question froze him mid-motion. "Do what?" he said, though he already knew. "End me," she said. "I begged you to." He looked into the fire a long while before answering. "'Cause I done too much of that already," he said finally. "Killed men in the war, killed wolves that came for my stock, even put my own horse down once. But I'll be damned if I let another soul die when I can help it." She stared at him, her lip trembling, eyes wet but unreadable. "You don't know what you've done," she whispered. Eli frowned. "What do you mean?" But she turned away, her face pale in the lamplight, and said nothing more. The next morning he found a small silver locket tucked inside her torn dress when he brought her clean clothes. Inside was a tiny picture, her and a man in a sheriff's uniform. Written beneath, "Sheriff A. Harland, Sweetwater County." Eli's stomach sank. Sweetwater was 50 miles east, and rumor said the sheriff there had been shot 3 weeks ago during a jailbreak. When Clara saw the locket in his hand, she broke down sobbing. "He was my father," she said through tears. "They killed him, and they tried to kill me too." Eli sat beside her, his rough hand resting awkwardly on her shoulder. "Who did?" "Outlaws," she said, voice shaking. 3 of them. They wanted something from my father's safe. I ran and one of them shot me." She paused, her eyes darting toward the window. "They think I'm dead. But if they find out I'm not," Eli finished her thought, "they'll come looking." And they did. 3 nights later, as the sky turned bruised with thunderclouds, Eli saw the flicker of lanterns out on the ridge. 3 horses. 3 riders. He blew out his lamps and loaded his shotgun. Clara sat up weakly in bed, her eyes wide with terror. "You can't fight them," she whispered. "They'll kill you." Eli smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Maybe, but they'll sure as hell know they picked the wrong farm." The rain came down in sheets. The riders dismounted and crept toward the barn, shadows stretching under lightning flashes. Eli waited behind the window until he heard the creak of the barn door. Then he stepped out onto the porch, the shotgun gleaming in the stormlight. "Evening, boys," he called. "You're trespassing." One of the men turned, his face half hidden by a soaked hat. "We're looking for a girl." "You seen her?" Eli cocked the gun. "Ain't seen nobody worth your kind's trouble." They drew their revolvers. The first shot missed him by inches. Eli fired back, catching one square in the chest. The thunder rolled with the gunfire until you couldn't tell which was which. Another man rushed him, swinging a knife. They crashed into the mud, grappling. Eli felt the blade slice his arm, but didn't stop. He drove his elbow hard into the outlaw's jaw, sending teeth flying. The man fell still. The last one bolted toward the house. Inside, Clara screamed. She'd grabbed Eli's revolver from the table, but her hands shook too badly to aim. The outlaw burst through the door, grinning, soaked in blood and rain. "Should have stayed dead, girl," he hissed. Before he could pull the trigger, a blast tore through the room. He froze, eyes wide, then fell face first to the floor. Behind him stood Eli, one arm bleeding, smoke curling from his shotgun barrel. Clara dropped the pistol, sobbing, as Eli staggered against the doorframe. "It's over," he said hoarsely. She ran to him, pressing her hands against his wound. "You saved me," she said, voice breaking. Eli gave a tired smile. "You saved yourself, Clara. I just refused to do the wrong thing twice." He slid down to the floor, the rain pounding the roof like the beating of drums. By morning, the sheriff's men from Sweetwater found them. The bodies of the outlaws lay cold in the yard, and Eli was barely conscious. When they asked what happened, Clara spoke before anyone else could. "He refused to kill me when I begged him to," she said. "And because of that, I lived long enough to see justice." Months later, when spring came to the prairie, the fields around Eli's farm began to grow green again. Clara stayed on to help with the planting. Some said she owed him her life. Others said she just couldn't bear to leave the man who'd shown mercy when she had no hope left. One evening, as the sun set behind the fields, she looked at him and asked, "Why did you really save me?" Eli looked out across the land, his voice quiet. "Because once I prayed for someone to save me. Didn't happen then. So I figured I'd do better next time." She smiled softly and slipped her hand into his, scarred, strong and warm. And though the prairie wind still howled through the nights, it no longer sounded like mourning. It sounded like peace, for the farmer who refused to pull the trigger had done more than save a life. He'd saved his own soul,